All right, guys, we're going to start talking about chapter 11. Um, this is where we're going to be talking about our study of ancient Rome. This is one of my favorite chapters to do in school, and I'm so sorry that we're not together to do it because the chapter about ancient Greece and this chapter are very important to what we'll talk about in the next chapter, which is the rise of Christianity. And that's really what I wanted to do with you guys together in class. But this would be a pretty quick video. You've already read the lesson. You were supposed to have read the lesson out of your book today and discussed it with your co-teacher. So I'm trusting that you've done that, and we're just going to hit some of the high points of things that I want you to know about. All right, let's get started. First of all, in each chapter we like to start talking about the geography. And, I really have enjoyed doing geography with you guys this year. I'm going to actually flip over here to this map, and I'm going to talk about the geography of ancient Rome. So one thing that you will notice is that Greece was located over here on the Balkan Peninsula. And so just to the west of that is where we'll find the ancient Roman Empire over here on this peninsula right here, called the Apennine Peninsula. I've always called it the Apennine Peninsula, but I was listening to something yesterday and I heard them call it the Apennine Peninsula. And the way you can remember that it's called that is it's got the word nines at the end of it. Okay, so the Apennines Peninsula. Okay, and so this area here, this peninsula juts out into the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, and we could look at a few of those things. Right down here is the Mediterranean Sea, but we can see that it is surrounded by the Adriatic Sea right here and the Tyrrhenian Sea over here. Now just remember that right here, the Gulf of Corinth almost completely cut the Balkan Peninsula in half. We don't really have that here on the Apennine Peninsula. Just like the ancient Greece had many islands around here, and the largest one was Crete down here. Italy, or the Italian peninsula, the Apennine Peninsula, there's a large island right here at the toe of the boot, and this island is called Sicily. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so we'll come back to this map in a minute, but the Roman Empire is found on this peninsula right here, and it lies just to the west of the Balkan Peninsula, which was the home of ancient Greece. All right, so let's go back up here. We'll review a little bit about ancient Greece. Of course, we've already talked about how it was located on the Balkan Peninsula. It was surrounded by the Aegean Sea, the Ionian Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. And if you go back into your social studies journal and you look at your map of ancient Greece, you'll see that. We talked about the Gulf of Corinth, how it almost cut the mainland of Greece in half. Okay, and we talked about how ancient Greece was made up of a lot of islands, but the largest one was Crete. And again, you can look at that in your social studies journal. Um, I, of course, would want to continue your social studies journal with you. Um, I just don't know that that's going to be practical to do while we're at home. Um, it would be a lot of copying, and I we're just going to step away from your social studies journal right now. But anything, if you want to take your journal and if you want to take notes in it, feel free to do that. I think that would be a really super good thing for you to do. Okay, of course, we remember the Greek writers that you learned about, Homer and Aesop, and I'm really sorry we didn't get to do your Aesop plays in class. I was really looking forward to that. Remember the famous Greek scientists were Archimedes was the most famous one, and of course, he invented the study of calculus, which is still very important today. We talked about philosophers of ancient Greece, Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem. It's still in use to today. We talked about the sophists who said, oh, if we can't see it, is it true? If we don't believe it, is it true? Then we talked about Socrates. Now, Socrates is the father of Western philosophy. We could go off to college. You could go off to college. I've already been to college, but you could go off to college and you could get a whole degree in philosophy. Don't do it. But you could go get one in philosophy and you could take whole classes about Socrates because he is the father of Western philosophy. And his question is, what is the best way to live? And then um, Socrates taught Plato, and then Plato taught Aristotle, and Aristotle taught Alexander the Great. So we're still influenced by these Greek thinkers today to some extent. Of course, we know that the government of Greece, didn't have a central government. It had lots of city states, and of course we remember that the two most famous city states were Athens and Sparta. But the big idea that came out of ancient Greece governmentally was this idea of people rule, also known as democracy. All right. So when we talked about Greece, we talked about these public places, the Acropolis, which would have been up on a hill as the religious center, the Agora, the marketplace, also a meeting place for people to do business, the theater, which was the largest gathering place in an area, the gymnasium where only men would go to practice sports, remember, and of course the stadium, which was the racing track that would have long sides and curved ends. Think about a track where you'd have track meets today. It would be shaped like that. Okay, and then we talked about Athens and Sparta, and of course we know that Athens was the cultural center. It was the place where the idea of democracy was first born. Boys were um, trained from an early age to be good citizens. We know that they became citizens at the age of 18 in Athens, and we know that that became the most famous city-state. Okay, and that Athena was its patron goddess. Of course, I mean little g goddess. And Sparta, we know that boys were trained from a young age to be good soldiers and defend Sparta. We know that foreigners and philosophers were really not welcome in Sparta. We know it was the most powerful city state, and pardon me, and that uh, they were more interested in training for warfare than they were in educating for reading and writing. So most men in Sparta would have been illiterate. That means they could not read or write. But it didn't matter. They were going off to war. Their big thing was loyalty to Sparta and defend Sparta. And then, of course, we know that the work in Sparta would have been done by helots. Those would have been slaves that would have been caught in battle. Okay, and then we learned about Philip II, who was the king of Macedonia. And if we go back to this map, Macedonia would be, I believe, up here someplace. I know it's a north of Greece someplace. They didn't really like Macedonia. The Grecians didn't really like Macedonia, but Macedonia liked the Greek culture. Okay, so Philip was the father of Alexander. Alexander took over for his father. He became known as Alexander the Great, and under him, the Greek city states united, and um, he ended up having a pretty big empire. It didn't last a long time, but it extended all the way to the east to India. It was a pretty vast empire. We know that Daniel prophesied about Alexander in the Bible. Um, in the areas that he conquered, he kind of liked to have cities named after him. And so when he conquered Egypt, there is a city there that they named Alexandria, Egypt. And that was a pretty big famous city, the most famous city probably named after him. Okay. And in the age after Alexander died, that was called the Hellenistic Age. And we talked about this just a little bit in class because this was the age right before the age of the rise of the Roman Empire. And the language of Greek was very important. And it became the language that was very important in almost all of the world at that time. And because of that, um, pardon me, because of that, it became real important to the spread of the gospel later on. Almost all the languages of Europe um, based their alphabets on the Greek alphabet. In this time of the Hellenistic age, Rome became the ruler of the world, but they kept spreading the Greek culture because they were so impressed by it. Um, like I said, Greek became the most important world language. God used this to make way for the writing of the New Testament. Not only could people speak Greek, but they could write it, they could read it. It was very important. All right, so here we are. We're back to the land of ancient Rome. I'm going to go here and look at the bigger map. All right, so Rome is located right here on the coast of the Tyrrhenian Sea. And right here is this river called the Tiber River. And that's pretty important because big cities, they have to have a good water source, a good water supply. And so the Tiber River helped Rome become an important city. Like I said, it's located on the Apennine Peninsula, which today is called the Italian Peninsula. Of course, the Roman Empire, the most important city in the Roman Empire is the city of Rome. It's located in the modern day country of Italy. I've already told you that it's located west of Greece and it extends out into the Mediterranean Sea. Surrounded by the Adriatic and the Tyrrhenian Seas. It looks like a boot. It's very easy to find on a map of Europe. And of course, I mentioned this island of Sicily here. Now, the Roman Empire is really important because when we read the Bible, we read about the Roman Empire helped to prepare the world for the coming of Christ. Jesus Christ lived during the time of the Roman Empire. So that's where we are in history right now. Okay, so we'll go here. All right, well, let's just go right here because it's easier for me to talk over the map than it is to just talk and about words. Okay, so mountain ranges are pretty important in the Roman Empire. One of the most important mountain ranges there are right up here to the north of the Italian or Apennine Peninsula. And this is the largest mountain range in Europe. It's called the Alps. It's right up here. Okay, but it's not the only mountain range that has to do with the Roman Empire. There's the one that runs down the length of the peninsula, and they're called the Apennine Mountains or the Apennine Mountain Range. Okay, so the Alps are north of Italy, and they're the largest mountain system in Europe. And then the Apennines run down the length of Italy. They're not as high in elevation as the Alps, but it's really important that Rome lies right here to the west of the mountains. And so these mountains right here help give Rome, the city of Rome, natural protection. So they've got mountains and hills right here to protect them, and they've got a great water source right here on the Tiber River. And then, of course, they could come and go right here off the Tyrrhenian Sea. So it's a pretty good location that Rome is in. Okay, so the Tiber is not the only important river in the Roman Empire. There's this one up here, and it's called the Po River, P-O. That one's easy to spell. It's actually the longest river in Italy. It begins up here, its source is up here in the Alps, and it flows towards the east. So that means it's going to empty out into the Adriatic Sea. And you can see up here it's got lots of branches that run off of the Po River. Okay. The Tiber River begins in central Italy, and it flows through the city of Rome, and it empties into the Tyrrhenian Sea. So it starts up here, it flows through Rome, and it empties into the Tyrrhenian Sea. All right, so let's talk about the people of ancient Rome, or the people of the Roman Empire. We've got 4 groups of people that helped begin this empire: the Italians, the Latins, the Etruscans, and the Greeks. Okay, so the Italians actually show up first about 1000 BC, before the time of Christ, before Christ, and that was the Itali people, and they settled here on the Apennine Peninsula, and Italy is named after this group of people, the Itali people, Italians, Italy, okay? And then came the Latins, and they settled up here around the Tiber River, and they're the ones that built the city of Rome. The Latins built the city of Rome. And so the language used by Romans is a language that is still used today to some extent. People don't go around and speak it that much, but it's the basis for a lot of other languages, and that's the language of Latin. And so we have a lot of English words that come from Latin roots. Okay? And so the Etruscans came in about 800 BC, and they settled to the north of the Tiber River. They were a strong and powerful people, and they built a lot of the cities in Italy that are still around even today. Okay, and then the Greeks came in. Now remember, Greece is off over here to, no, sorry, I'm wrong. Greece is off over here to the east. And so it wasn't that big of a deal to get on a boat and leave Greece and come down and settle here in the southern part of the Italian peninsula, the Apennine Peninsula, or even to settle here on the island of Sicily. Okay. Now Rome up here, remember it's surrounded by the Apennine Mountains, and with mountains you have hills also. And so Rome has a nickname, and it's called the City of the Seven Hills. Okay, so remember that. Rome's nickname is the City of the Seven Hills. Okay, so you might say, Mrs. Peck, why in the world did you waste your time going back over Greece when we're talking about Rome? Well, the Greeks influenced Rome a lot. The Greeks built a lot of colonies in southern Italy and on the island of Sicily, right here. And so this area became known as Greater Greece. Okay? Greek culture was a strong influence on the Romans as they built their empire. It influenced their architecture and their building, uh, the way they built their buildings. Of course, the Greeks spent a lot of time chiseling things out of marble and stone for their buildings, but the Romans were a little bit more innovative and practical, and they figured out how to build with brick. It was quicker to build like that and cheaper, but then they also figured out that they could put a facade over the brick of marble, and it would look just as good as Greek buildings would. So they could cover their buildings with marble and make them look good, but they cost way less to build. But they were similar in strength. And I bet there's still a lot of these buildings around even today, because that's something that Italy is known for, is having lots of ancient buildings. The Greeks influenced the Romans in their fine arts, their musics, their painting, their sculpture, and their acting. Romans imitated also the religion of the Greeks, and they still worshipped some of the same little g gods. Okay, they worshipped Jupiter and Mars and Mercury and Neptune and Venus. And one thing that I would have given you to put into your social studies journal, besides a map of Italy, is that I would have given you a list of the Greek gods and the Roman gods. They're the same gods, it's just sometimes the Romans gave them new names. So Zeus would have been called Jupiter in the Roman Empire. Hera would be called Juno. Poseidon in Rome would have been called Neptune. Hades would have been called Pluto. Ares would have been called Mars. Heracles would have been called Hercules. Eros would be called Cupid. We've heard of Cupid before when we think of Valentine's Day. So I've mentioned pretty much the most famous ones that we would know of: Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, Mars. Where have we heard those before? Where have we heard those names? That's right. A lot of the planets in our solar system are named after Greek gods. So there you go. And even some of the moons of these planets are named after Greek gods. So that's just a little scientific fun fact tie-in to social studies. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed reading with your co-teacher, and I'll talk to you later.